thanks so much for letting me come into your hallowed halls this evening to talk about a topic that has touched way too many of us over the course of our lives. And I hope to shed some light on it and perhaps give you some new information tonight, and if not that, at least entertain you over the next little while. Now you're going to see me do this every now and again. It's not because I have a nervous tick, but it's because I'm wanting to get Monty's attention. Monty, yeah, if we can skip right past that one. There we go. So when he's going to be my clicker tonight, so when I go like this, I will have a nervous tick by the end of the evening, I'm sure. But I'll go like this. Does that work to advance the slides? Okay. So my name's Ruth Patrick, and I run a program called Women of Silicon Valley, Women SV. And what we do is we work with primarily women. We work with some men as well who are involved in domestic violence relationships in our area. But I have to tell you, I am now getting calls from all over the world. The last one came from Sri Lanka. So the word is getting around. This has been a very busy year for Women SV. We've been on a number of media interviews. We've been on the Megyn Kelly Today Show, the Good Morning America. We've been in the New York Times. And I'm really happy and honored to say that CBS gave me an award for public service. It's called the Jefferson Award. So because of all this attention, I think the Me Too movement has really helped shine a light on this issue. So what we do at Women SV is we offer direct client support, which involves like a helpline and a support group and connecting women to services. And we also do professional trainings for doctors, therapists, attorneys, teachers, all sorts of folks. The last one I did was for Superior Court. And then we do educational sessions like the one tonight out in the community. So here we go. Thank you. Just a few disclaimers before we start. I am a teacher by training. I'm not a therapist. I'm not an attorney, but I do trainings for therapists and attorneys. And one of the reasons for that is that they don't get a lot of education in domestic violence. Do you know that you can become a family law attorney with zero education in domestic violence and then hang up your shingle? That's a little worrisome. I want to make sure that it's really clearly understood that I'm talking about a small subset of affluent folks who become abusive. There's lots of people with power and money and wealth and influence, and they're wonderful people. Some of them are on my board, men and women. And I want to make sure that we're talking about this very small subset who abuse their power, abuse their credentials. And you'll see what I mean by that in order to control their partners. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories because I'm Irish and I can't help it, but I will tweak the details to protect the identities of people involved. And I do want to be very clear to acknowledge that men can be victims of domestic violence as well. Domestic violence knows no boundaries in terms of economics, profession, or gender. So I want to make it really clear that men can be victims of domestic violence, and in a way, it really attacks the core of their self-esteem to be in a relationship with a woman or a male partner who's abusing them. So there are women who can be perpetrators. So, but because of the statistics that we have now, and I want to make clear that it's the reported statistics, many men, because of the shame attached to it, are afraid to reach out with good reason. They worry about being stigmatized, and there's not a lot of resources for men out in the domestic violence community yet. So if you're interested at all in this topic, please pursue it or talk to me, and let's see if we can get some more support going for men who are victims of domestic violence. But because of the reported statistics now, 85% to 95% of victims of domestic violence are female. When I refer to perpetrator, just to be efficient tonight, I'll use the pronoun he for perpetrator and she for victim, just knowing that it can happen in both genders. Okay, the stories I'll be sharing with you are the stories I've gathered from working with over 1,200 women now and 8 men over the course of the last few years. We don't have a lot of data on this population. Why? For the same reason. The shame, the social stigma of women are not reaching out, survivors are not reaching out to the very places that keep track of the data: hospitals, police stations, and domestic violence agencies. So first, some troubling statistics. 1 in 3 women on the planet will be raped or beaten during her lifetime. That's incredible news, and we're not even talking about technological abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional abuse. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, or 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men, depending on the statistics you're looking at. 1 in 5 college women will be a victim of intimate partner violence. And we have more acts of violence towards women in that age group account for more injury than all those other things combined. Death, disability, mutilation accounts for more, they produce more death, disability, mutilation than cancer, malaria, and traffic accidents combined. And here's a leading lethality factor for pregnant women. Homicide is one of the top causes of death for pregnant women. So one of the things she has most to fear when she's pregnant is her partner. We all remember Lacey Peterson and the cases that have happened lately in the news. So what is domestic violence? Using power and abusing it to control another person. And we often think about it in terms of physical and sexual abuse, but it includes so much more. Have you all seen Big Little Lies? Did you see that? Read the book or see the series? There's Nicole Kidman there being intimidated by her husband before he physically abuses her. But you can terrorize somebody without even touching them. You can coerce and control them without even touching them. So it includes any behaviors that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, coerce, threaten, blame. So you didn't have to touch anybody to do all those things. Or the physical. It's not just an adult issue. It affects children as well. It actually changes and interferes with their brain development when they grow up in an abusive home. The Kaiser and the Center for Disease Control, CDC, did a study that showed that with more categories of trauma, including domestic violence, they can take up to 20 years off a person's lifespan. Then they cause mental and physical behavioral problems as well. And it also leads to an increased risk of sexual abuse of the children when there's physical abuse in the home. It's an intergenerational problem. See, today you see bullies on the playground. Sometimes they're imitating the bad behavior of their peers or what they saw on TV. Sometimes they're imitating what's going on at home. So today on the playground, tomorrow is teen dating violence, get a little older on the college campus, grow up and get married, possibly intimate partner violence, carried forward long enough, it can become elder abuse. It's all about power and control in so many different ways. Intimidating, using names to degrade, demean somebody, isolating them from their family and friends, minimizing, denying, blaming. Another word for that is gaslighting that we're hearing a lot of these days. Undermining the relationship with the children, putting her on an allowance, abusing their power, micromanaging their daily activities, threatening them. So we get this cycle of violence where sometimes there's a period of calm, and then you may feel that there's like tension in the air, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, an explosion, verbal or physical, and then cooling off period. What people often don't realize, that cooling off period where it's all nicey-icey, women often think, oh, this is the man I married, or the men think, this is the woman I married, this is who I fell in love with, this is who they could be again, and they don't realize that that's part of the cycle of control, because it keeps them in the relationship. That's false hope. And I have to say, false hope has killed more survivors than cancer, because it keeps you trapped in a relationship where it becomes a pattern, and a pattern over time becomes a downward spiral. What does a healthy relationship look like? Imagine a teeter-totter, for those of you as ancient as I am to remember teeter-totters, more or less equally balanced, right? But here's how you feel when you're in a healthy relationship. Respected, loved, treated like an equal, valued, safe. And your partner, why do you feel like that? Because your partner respects you and your boundaries. Love that book, Cloud and Townsend, and you read the book on boundaries. Listens to you, encourages, comforts, praises, supports you, is honest, doesn't hold grudges, has good character. Cloud and Townsend talk about character and values being such important qualities in a healthy relationship. Not this, not this. The teeter-totter, swaying down so that you feel disrespected, ignored, inferior, anxious, afraid, unsafe, Ask yourself, do you feel like that on a regular basis, or even sometimes in your relationship? And why? Because your partner is doing all these things, trying to control you, putting you down, frightening you, disrespecting you, comparing you to others, being jealous, checking up on you, lying, cheating on you, hurting you, humiliating you, making you feel unsafe. Teeter-totter. Healthy relationships are about equality, not control. We have this idea that domestic violence doesn't happen in the nicer parts of town. We're just better at hiding it. And we think if it does happen, oh, she should be able to look after it herself. She's got money, right? Not always. Sometimes, often, her partner is taking control of all the finances. So it doesn't matter what economic area you live in, come from, power and control are basically the same everywhere in the world. It just gets expressed differently depending on what tools you have at your disposal. If the more money, the more power, the more influence you have, the more tools you have to wield that power and control. People with money, they've got the power, money, influence, and technical savvy. We'll talk about that too in a moment, to make it hard for a woman to leave safely and stay safe, to keep custody of her children, or maintain a standard of living anything like her partners. What does a typical abuser look like? Okay, here's a test for the evening, the one with the red frame around it. What's this guy wearing? Everybody?
Wife beater.
Wife beater, thank you. Yeah, he's the typical one that comes to mind, right, when you think of the abuser. Every single one up there in that rogues gallery has been guilty of domestic violence, and some have committed the ultimate act. Upper left, killed his girlfriend, college student, killed his college student girlfriend. Who's that with the puppy? Who's that? Chris Brown, thank you. Never mind him. The one after that, Ed Dow, wealthy developer in Los Gatos. We'll talk about him more in a moment. Who's that guy? Remember him? Scott Peterson, thank you. This guy, remember him?
Yeah.
Ray Rice. You all watched that video, didn't you? In the elevator, cold cocking his girlfriend, knocking her unconscious. Yeah. This guy, recognize him? G, going by G. G, remember that name, we'll talk about him in a moment. Oh, look at this guy, gentlemen. President of the Rotary Club, don't you know? Remember him? Oh, look at her. Just in the news lately, Asia Argento has been accused of assaulting a 17-year-old young male actor. And we don't have the final finding yet, but her boyfriend at the time, Anthony Bourdain, paid the young man off. And he had a picture that's been authenticated by several sources of both of them in bed. 17-year-old boy and older woman accusing her of sexual assault. Recognize him, everybody? OJ, thank you. This fellow, look at the bow tie. Doesn't he look dapper? He has an MD after his name. We're going to visit him again in a moment. And George Hughley VI. Anytime you've got a Roman numeral after your name, you know you come from money, right? He ended up killing his college girlfriend. Both of those. National champion lacrosse player killed his national champion lacrosse player girlfriend. Their family made some meaning out of that tragedy by developing an app called My Plan. But through the Love Foundation, Yardley Love was the name of his girlfriend, and it's a danger assessment that college students can do to determine their level of lethality risk. So, here are the folks that I work with. These are my clients, the folks that come in, that need support. Engineers, doctors, professors, lawyers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, CEOs, religious leaders, stay-at-home parents. To give you an idea of the occupations they come from. And here are the occupations of their abusive partners. Oh, engineers, doctors, professors, lawyers, psychologists, entrepreneurs, CEOs, religious leaders, stay-at-home parents. In other words, anybody can be a victim of domestic violence, anybody can be a perpetrator. Just because somebody has an MD after their name, just because they're a professor, just because they're a religious leader, just because they're a therapist, doesn't mean they're not human, flawed, and could possibly be an abuser or a survivor. After working with over 1,200 women over the past 7 years and 8 men, I've developed this sort of profile, imagine if you will, this portrait gallery of characteristics that many of my ladies report, and the gentlemen who are referring to their partners, that their partners' characteristics, behaviors that they express. And I'd like you to just put your therapist hat on for a moment, even if you're not a therapist, pretend you are for a moment. Because when I do these talks for therapists, I say, I can't use diagnostic labels, but you all can. So just pretend for a moment that you are therapists for a moment. And what diagnostic label are you going to put on somebody that acts like this, thinks like this? Oh my gosh, you're going to the head of the class already. Okay, and there's another one, but hold off on that one for a moment. Let's keep everybody in suspense for a moment. Highly educated, advanced professional career, good public image, look on a paper, they present well in public, often involved in philanthropic work or volunteer work. They'll coach their kids' soccer team or donate to worthy causes. Charming, but also calculating, manipulative. They come from all races. They tend to define their children in terms of their accomplishments. These are the things that motivate them: sex, money, winning, revenge, power and control. They are all about themselves. It's got to be their show. They've got to be the center of attention. They're very good at convincing other people that their partner is crazy or abusive. They project blame onto their partner, the things that they're doing often. So it's important to examine other sources to determine the truth. More. Now after this one, let's really think here. What could this be, this type of person? They lack empathy. They lack remorse. They lack conscience. They lack moral maturity. They lie easily, often, and convincingly. They lie even when they don't need to. It's like they just want to keep in practice.
Sociopath.
What was that?
Sociopath.
Whoa, thank you very much. Thank you. Narcissist, psychopath, sociopath. You're getting them all. Okay, that's what the therapists feed back to me. So, they often put precise details in with the lies. So, and include bits of truth. Weave the truth in with the lies to make them more believable. They usually blame their partner for everything rather than take responsibility for themselves. They have to be right. Even when they're wrong, they have to be right. And they must always win. They would be the last to label themselves an abuser. They minimize whatever damage they do. They're very good at playing the victim. You remember Oscar Pistorius? Remember Blade Runner? Who shot his girlfriend through a bathroom door 5 times on Valentine's Day. Beware intimate occasions when you're with an abuser. They do not do intimate occasions. And then he walks around on his stumps in front of the jury to prove how he could not possibly have taken a weapon in his hand and fired it through a door. Something didn't fit with that picture. So they are good at playing the victim. Very, very convincing. They're good at shaming others, but don't ever try to shame or call attention to or even hold accountable an abuser. They tend to view relationships in terms of war, business, and chess, and they'll even use the language when they leave the relationship. This is war. I will destroy you. And in terms of business, it's like a relationship is like, oh, what's my return on investment here? What am I getting out of you? People is resources. And you plumb the depths of those resources, and when you use them up, you discard them and move on to a younger, newer, fresher model. Steps ahead. And she or he may be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and fighting fires in the moment as he's setting them, and he's able to think several, or she's able to think several steps ahead. Okay, great quote from Judith Herman. In order to escape accountability for his crimes, the perpetrator does everything in his power to promote forgetting. If secrecy fails, the perpetrator attacks the credibility of his victim. If he cannot silence her absolutely, he tries to make sure no one listens. And abuse thrives in secrecy, silence, and isolation. That's why I'm so happy about the Me Too movement when people are finally starting to speak out. Remember Bob Bashara here? President, oh, he says, how could I have killed my wife? I'm president of the Rotary Club. That's what he called himself, but you know what some of the jurors called him?
Monty, move ahead.
Oh, wait, no, back it up, Monty. There's a couple of slides like that. It's going to feel like you got to advance to the next slide. It's because I'm packing a punch here. Okay, but some of the jurors called him also monster, narcissist, sociopath, master manipulator, arrogant, pathological liar. He paid his handyman to strangle his wife. Here's what his wife's sister said about her husband. Jane supported him, and she was committed to him, and she would have done just about anything for Bob, except, and this is key, open up her 401k. It is this reluctance to allow him access to her life savings that ultimately led Bob to kill her. So true in this demographic with this type of abuser. Follow the money and you will often follow the motivation. Okay, remember G? Jarash Shalal. Grew up in San Jose. He'd been teased growing up. He's of Sikh origin and was teased because of that. Like many high school dropouts in Silicon Valley, he went on to create his own company and sold it for several $100 million. He created his own nonprofit, donated $1 million to it to fight hate crimes. He went undercover and donated $35,000 to a women's shelter up in San Francisco. He's been on the Oprah Winfrey Show. She was singing his praises, and she's going, and he's single, girls, and they're all swooning. There he was on, Charlie Rose, another disgraced figure of authority. There he is up in his high-rise penthouse. One more thing. Oh, domestic violence conviction. And one more, in the same, twice. He was caught on video hitting and kicking his girlfriend 117 times.
Oh my gosh.
They weren't able to use that video because the police hadn't obtained a proper warrant for it. But you can see why they grabbed it, because he's technically savvy and they were worried about him remotely wiping it. Technological abuse, that's another huge issue. More examples of domestic violence. I'm going to ask you if we can hold the questions until, don't forget what you're going to say, but please hold the questions and I'd be happy to answer them at the end. Just write them down, please. More examples of domestic violence in Silicon Valley. Neha Rastogi, did you see that case that went viral? That's the reason why the Megyn Kelly Today Show called me, is because this case was talked about all over the internet, about how she was a high-level executive, so was he. And she caught him, she filmed him assaulting her when she asked an innocent question about a bug on a website that she found. And then, remember Ed Dow, wealthy developer in Los Gatos. He ended up killing himself and their son. We'll talk about that more in a moment. What does emotional abuse look like in this demographic? So there was one of my ladies who was asked by her attorney, why don't you let me fight harder to get a fairer settlement for you? I could get so much more for you than you're letting me go after. She was still living with her husband, the physician. Why? Because he had taken control of all the financial assets. She was penniless. So she said, you know why I don't let you fight harder to get a bigger settlement for me? You know what he told me the other night over dinner? He said, do you know there's more than 40 ways to kill a woman and make it look like she died from natural causes? Now, he didn't say, I'm going to run you over this afternoon with my truck, right, where she could have called the police. There was the threat, the implied threat. She knew about backing off. One of my other ladies, her husband was not just a physician, but had a degree in martial arts, black belt, and was able to inflict tremendous pain and internal damage on her with no outward signs. Oh, one of my other ladies, her husband said to her, physician, he said, do you know how I'm going to kill you? I'm going to inject you with a solution between your toenail and your toe. A poisonous solution that not even the coroner will think to look for. Between the toenail and the toe. And then I'm going to dismember you. And he would threaten to take his scalpel after the kids, taser them. But that's an abuse of his medical credentials. Right? And it's not just, these are not just anecdotes. Sometimes these stories make the news. Remember Dr. Martin McNeil, Dr. Bowtie? Not that I don't have anything against bow ties, but here he is presenting the picture of the gentleman, and he has another dark secret here. He was found to have murdered his wife. He was, of course, having an affair, and he had bragged to an earlier mistress, saying that he was able to kill somebody and make it look like they died of natural causes. And here's what his own daughter said, we're just so happy he can't hurt anyone else. Doctor, lawyer, bishop in his church, murderer. He ended up committing suicide in prison. Let's skip that. That's the Good Morning America piece where I talked about technological abuse. Have you all heard the term gaslighting?
No.
Gaslighting is when you try to get inside somebody's head and make them start to question their memory, over time their sanity. I never said that. I would never do that. Or can't you remember what you're even, like, what you did in the last, half hour? It can be very subtle, like, oh honey, it hurts my feelings when you make fun of my cooking when we're in front of others. I would never do that. Or, you're getting way too sensitive. Two, I know I always put my car keys down right here when I come home. I put them down, go get some coffee, come back, they're gone. Honey, have you seen my keys? No. They reappear an hour or two later. Well, that's odd, isn't it, that they just reappear? Can't you even keep track of your keys anymore? You are really losing it. So getting inside somebody's head, making them doubt their reality. I had a lady who had a 4-year-old child. The 4-year-old child fell down, had a very bloody knee. Blood was pouring out. The child was screaming at the top of his lungs, and Dad was not doing well with the tears. And Mom said, he got mad at both of them, and Mom said, look, we need a Band-Aid, look what's happening here. And Dad says, there's nothing going on there. There's no blood there, what are you talking about? And she said she had been so under his spell by that time that she literally saw the blood evaporate before her very eyes. That is the power of suggestion, the power of coercive control, the power of manipulation, the power of gaslighting. It can make you think you're crazy over time. Technological abuse. There's an old movie called Gaslight with Ingrid Bergman, fabulous movie, and it holds up very well. So here's the 21st century equivalent of making somebody doubt their memory, and also using technology as a way to stalk them, but over time making them think that their every move is being watched. So just some examples up here. Second from the left, those are electronic locks. We had a lady who was a literal prisoner in her own home. He would change the code on the locks every day, so she couldn't get out. Another lady wondered, how come he's able to get into my apartment and take all the hard copies of the evidence of abuse? There's no sign of forced entry. He was using a bump key. One of our ladies being pursued by a drone. There's no regulations, very few regulations around drones yet. One of my other ladies came up from Los Angeles, fled her abuser from coming up from Los Angeles. She's in the Bay Area, driving around. She's got a new fancy car, and cars nowadays are basically computers on wheels. And she's using her voice-activated command to direct her GPS system to take her in a certain place in the Bay Area. It gets overridden by her husband's voice directing her back to LA. How freaky is that? You can hack into somebody's phone, you can listen to their phone calls, you can pretend to be another person, you'll think you're getting a text from Mom or your sister, and it's really him, because it's counterfeit or spoof messaging. So many of my ladies have had hidden cameras put in smoke detectors, in their light fixtures. Ooh, makes you wonder, doesn't it? In the shower, alarm clock, even Barbie is nothing sacred anymore. So dolls are smart dolls now, and you can have a conversation with Barbie. And if the wrong person has had access to Barbie and created a little account, an iCloud account with a password, he can or she can capture that conversation that's uploaded to the cloud and listen to it later. Banned in Germany. Oh, there's hacking into somebody's Facebook page, saying horrible things. Rosalind, I am cheating whore, Policarpio. You know she didn't write that, but her boyfriend did and later murdered her. She was a nurse with McAfee. Stalking can be done in many ways, physically or electronically. It's very dangerous when you combine it with intimate partner violence, with domestic violence. So for the cases of women in domestic violence or domestic violence victims who've ended up being killed by their partner, 80% of them have been stalked prior. Sometimes you think your every move is being watched. Because it is. Financial abuse. Putting her on an allowance. Punishing her for overspending. We'll talk about Carmen Dow in a moment, who had that happen. What do you call it when an employee steals money from an employer? Embezzlement. What do you call it when a husband steals the life savings from his wife, or a wife steals the life savings from her husband?
Nothing.
Bad marriage, bad luck. Yeah, because the two become one in the eyes of the law. So legal abuse. This is when you transfer the abuse from home into the legal arena, and it's abuse by proxy, using the court system inadvertently. So trying to get full custody of the kids. He may have been abusive or neglectful of the children before, and all of a sudden he can't live without them. Taking her back to court repeatedly. One of my ladies, her husband spent $2 million taking her back to court, again and again, over frivolous charges. Trying to make her look like she's a perpetrator, or trying to make her look like she's crazy, setting her up and then calling the police and getting her arrested. Okay, an example of that, it happens so often, I call it the engineered restraining order, or the engineered 5150. So 5150 is a psychiatric hold. So you can take somebody's legal rights away from them if they're crazy and seem to be a harm to themselves or others. So, just a quick story about that. One of my ladies, married to a psychologist, said, the last time my husband tried to kill me, he's chasing me around the house with a knife, threatening to kill me, in great detail telling me what he's going to do to me. She was beside herself, absolutely out of her mind with terror, calls 911. Then what happens? He gets out in the driveway before she does. He meets the police before they get in the house, and he says, remember, he's a psychologist, thank God you're here. My wife, she's having another one of her psychotic meltdowns. Please help me to help her. I really do believe she needs to be on a 5150 hold for her own safety, for the sake of the children. So the police rush in. They see her like this, beside herself. Of course, they slap her in restraints and cart her off to Med, and he comes to visit her. Now, I forgot to mention, she had just told him that she wanted a divorce the day before. Losing control there. So he goes to visit her at Med, and she says to him, why did you do that? And you know what he says? Because I can. Abuse of credentials. So now let's talk a moment about spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse looks like this. Not allowing somebody to have their own spiritual practice, to go to the church of their choice, or ridiculing them, making them feel bad for it, forbidding them to go to certain religious gatherings, using religion as a weapon. Anything in the hands of an abuser can become a weapon. The law, medicine, the Bible. And that domestic violence is against biblical principles. There are people that say, oh, I must submit. There are pastors who say, I must turn the other cheek. When somebody is abusive towards you, nowhere in the Bible does it condone abuse. There's never permission given to it. The Bible is about love, and says husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. The number one commandment is love. Now these three things remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And regardless of how religious you are, I'm a Christian, so this means a lot to me, but no matter what religious faith you come from, you often have heard this at a wedding. Love is patient, love is kind, and as I'm reading it, please flip these things on your head and you'll understand what abuse is. The opposite of each one of these. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. There are people that almost seem to enjoy causing pain to the very people they should be protecting the most. Flip this on your head, on its head, that's what you get when love becomes abuse. Rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, thinks the best of their partner, always perseveres. Love never fails. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't that sum it all up? And then I hear ladies say, but I love him, or he loves me. And I ask them, please look at this, no matter what religion you come from. This is love. Is that what's being practiced with you? And now, I'm getting to the big finish here with the spiritual principles. Really important because this is somebody that many of us love and admire and whose words we hold dear. Let's take a look at this. And I quote, 95% of Christian women who attend Christian churches have never heard a sermon declaring abuse is wrong. Last time I was here 3 years ago, somebody came up to me and said, this is the first time I've ever heard anybody talking about domestic violence in any church. Submitting to abuse and continuing to endure it is not biblical, not godly, not Christ-like, not God's will, not right. Remember, this is a direct quote. If you are in a marriage or a relationship and there is physical aggression and you are a victim of abuse, get out. Get safe. Violence against a victim is evil and wrong. The abuse of a person for sexual gratification is evil and wrong, and the church ought to be the first to say so. And you know who said that? Someone we all know and love. Who? Ta-da! John Ortberg. Did you catch that service? I watched that one twice. Okay. Abuse victim look like? All of these folks have experienced abuse in one form or another, some the ultimate form. Do you remember, if you can go back to the upper left-hand corner, the young college student? That was his victim, Carly Halls. Carmen Dow, Ed Dow's wife and daughter. Jimmy Bennett, the young 17-year-old, sexually abused by Asia Argento. Miss America, Yardley Love. Remember I told you about the national championship lacrosse player who killed his girlfriend? That was her, young Yardley Love. Leslie Morgan Steiner, best-selling author, Harvard grad, domestic violence survivor. You all know her, Nicole Simpson. Chris Brown's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, Rihanna. One of the more recent cases, another pregnant woman killed by her partner. And of course we remember Scott and Lacey Peterson. Oh, this happened not that long ago. Christmas Eve. Remember what I told you? Intimate occasions. Watch out for family gatherings, intimate occasions. Finance manager at Apple stabbed to death on Christmas Eve by her husband. So what if they do reach out to the police, domestic violence survivors? Sometimes they have the cards stacked against them by their demeanor as a result of developing PTSD. Remember the story I told you of the lady whose husband was a psychologist and she's beside herself, frantic. When you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it can interfere with your ability to recall details, to tell them in an orderly way. You can end up leaving out key details. They may laugh or cry inappropriately or have a flat affect, and this affects their credibility if somebody's not trauma-informed. And why do they not call the police, or why do they change their mind afterwards? Fear of so many things. Losing their children, fear that they won't be believed, thinking, well, it's not that bad, it'll get better, wanting to protect their children, wanting to protect their husband's career or their wife's career, being dependent on their partner, fear of losing everything, including their life. Most domestic violence happens after a woman leaves, or a survivor leaves an abusive relationship. 70% of the domestic violence cases happen after. Okay. In Susan Weitzman's book, Susan Weitzman, her book, Not to People Like Us, she said the more money their partners had, the more afraid they were of being killed, not just by their partners, but perhaps by a third party. Remember Carmen Dow? He would beat her for putting highlights in her hair, for buying a new dress. She got a restraining order against him. She was afraid that he was going to hurt her. She was afraid he was going to hurt her children. Abusers often abuse children as a way to hurt the mother. And what more ultimate way to hurt a mother than to take their child away? So he ended up killing himself and their child. That's in spite of the restraining order, so that's not, a magic pill. What can you do about it? These are things to look for. These are red flags to look for, and you have a handout with all of these things in it, so I don't want to sort of read them word for word now, but if you can take a moment later and see if any of these ring a bell, somebody giving you the silent treatment or checking in too frequently, if they're texting you 50 times a day when you're first going out with them, that can look like love. But over time, it can start to look like stalking. Being super jealous or suspicious, not wanting her to talk to anybody else, How does he talk about past family relationships or intimate relationships? How does he treat his family? How controlling is he around money? Is he very charming in public? And does he have another face behind closed doors? We talk about Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. These aren't 100% reliable indicators, but they're things to look at. Does he interrupt her, talk over her frequently? Does he have to be the center of attention? Does he make all the decisions? So things to think about. Now, changes to look for in her. That was to look for in him or the perpetrator. Things to look for in her. And I've seen men where this has happened in them too, losing their self-confidence, getting more and more isolated, being afraid to upset their partner. Like she may be out having lunch with girlfriends, and when she looks at the time, she goes, "Oh my God!" Now, in an average relationship, you might say, "Oh my, Jerry's going to be upset. I'm going to be a half an hour later for dinner." Gee. But in an abusive relationship, you may see much more intense reaction if she's worried about being late. I had a woman whose husband would make her FaceTime him every day from work over lunch to make sure she wasn't fooling around with anybody else. Is her work performance being affected? More absenteeism? Is she self-medicating with drugs, alcohol, food? Sometimes people will go to the doctor for symptoms, and sometimes those symptoms can be treated in themselves. Every now and again, sometimes those symptoms are indicating something else is going on underneath, and they're looking for that something to kill or dull the pain in the moment. Look for how she behaves. Is she behaving differently around town? Does she seem easily distracted? Even children, when they're in school, often they get diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. That's a behavioral diagnosis, and it could be because of the way their brain works. It just is wired differently, and it could also be they're thinking about the stuff that's going on at home. Here's some things to say to someone you're concerned about. I am concerned for your safety, and this is in your handout too. I am concerned for your children's safety. I'm concerned that it will only get worse. Remember, that cycle often becomes a downward spiral. You don't deserve to be abused. He'll often say, if you didn't do X, Y, and Z, I wouldn't have to do this, or you're the only person I act like this with. You're the only person he's in an intimate relationship with. So you never, never, never deserve to be abused. No one does. And it's not your fault. You never cause it. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, you can't change it. And you're not alone. You can say, I'm here to help you, I can find someone who can. There are resources, they can call me. Please don't say, tell them to leave. Don't put pressure on them. Don't shame them. Don't judge them. Don't criticize them. Don't ask her why she's staying. And don't say, oh, there's two sides to every story. In a relationship where there's a power balance, yes, it takes two to tango, but we're not talking about a power balance. We're talking about quite a significant power imbalance here, and she's not responsible for that. It's like saying to a woman, what were you wearing the night you got raped? Don't recommend couples counseling. Typically, in domestic violence relationships, it's about power and control. He'll present as the victim. She'll be the problem. The two of them, the therapist and he, will try to create an alignment and make it her problem. God forbid she should bring up something that he's doing that upsets her, because she'll pay for it later. Don't pressure her to get a restraining order. Let it be her ultimate decision. And don't say, but he seems so nice. You hear these stories about people who end up getting, killed, and they always say, oh, he was a quiet guy, he seems so nice. You can't judge a book by its cover. It's very tempting to take the side of the perpetrator. All the perpetrator asks is that the bystander do nothing. He appeals to the universal desire to see, hear, and speak no evil. Think of the Second World War, when people were living just down the street from concentration camps. And it was so much easier to just ignore it, deny it, pretend it wasn't happening. The victim, on the contrary, asks the bystander to share the burden of pain. The victim demands action, engagement, and remembering. Please speak up, because it's all of our responsibility to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper, to watch over them. Can I ask you, just after all the types of abuse that I've talked about, how many of you know somebody who's been in a domestic violence or an abusive relationship in the course of their life? Did you just see a show of hands? Can you all look around? And whether I'm talking to an audience of 10 or 1,200, I get 99% of the people raising their hands. So you know, if it hasn't affected you, it's affected somebody you know. I'm looking for interest to see if there, folks might be interested in starting a support group here at Menlo Church in the fall. I have one that's running down in Los Altos, but we're getting more and more interest in it. I'm thinking about maybe Thursday evenings. We could set up one where the first hour is spent talking about some educational aspect. What are red flags to watch out for? What's the impact on children? What does gaslighting look like? We're just touching the surface of all of these things now. And then the second part is where people share if they feel so inclined. And Rebecca has the sign-up sheet there. If you're interested, no commitment, no cost. We believe it's everybody's right to be free and safe in their own home. We work on donations only. That's how we survive. So next, I think that's, there's also some resources in your packet, so feel free to check those out. And I want to thank you for your kind attention tonight. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you. Yes?
Can you share the PowerPoint?
Yes. Well, you have a hard copy of it with you? Yeah? You don't have it. There's more at the table. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I was once told in a violence group that psychological abuse is almost worse than physical abuse, ongoing physical abuse, because with the physical abuse, you know what happens, and with the psychological, it's going on and on. What's your experience?
100%. And you're reminding me of a slide I should have put in tonight, and that's such a key important point. For those of you who didn't hear it, emotional abuse, psychological abuse actually ends up doing more damage than physical abuse. And actually with children, studies have shown that children actually fare better when they are physically beaten versus emotionally abused. Neglect, shunning, emotional abuse is so killing to the soul. Emotional abuse leaves scars that can last a lifetime. The good news is with intervention, with therapy, with connecting with other resources, going to a support group, there's a therapeutic technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. One of our wonderful therapists who is a resource here at Menlo Church, her name is Martha Thorson, practices that form of therapy. That can be helpful. So yes, you're 100% right. The emotional abuse does the most damage. In some parts of the world, it's actually illegal to practice things like financial abuse, coercive control, which involves emotional abuse. We haven't reached that point yet, but hopefully we will evolve. Yes, Tommy.
Enjoyed your talk, Ruth. I noticed you talk about the support groups and stuff like that, and these women that may be dealing with depression and maybe even PTSD and self-esteem and things like that. Do you ever recommend activities like maybe ballroom dancing or jogging or things like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Worked for me, worked for you, it's worked for a bunch of people here. And thank you for that, Tony. That's a fabulous point you're making too, because trauma actually takes you out of your body. It has this dissociative effect. You want to be anywhere but where you are now. And when you lose touch with your body, when you stop listening to your gut feelings and what your body is telling you, it can lead to health issues, health problems over time. So one of the ways to recover from trauma is to feel comfortable once again being back in your body. And something like ballroom dancing, I often do recommend that to ladies, because here's a chance, and gentlemen too, because you don't have to have a partner. You can go there singly. At the Coverly Coverly Auditorium, it's a very non-threatening way to get back into the game and experiment with what it is to set boundaries. Is somebody holding you too tight? You ask them to, soften up a little bit, see how they respond, so you can sort of play the game of life. So thank you, Tony. Great point.
What about dips and things like that?
Sorry? Dips? No, not the dips.
No dip.
No dipping. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts, questions? Are we good? Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time.